All right, so just let's remember where we are in our unit. So, in terms of taxonomy, raise your hand if you can tell me what domain are we currently discussing? Abby? Eukarya. Second, what kingdom? Raise your hand. What kingdom are we in, Jack?
Did you say fish?
No.
No.
Colin?
Animalia.
Animalia. So domain Eukarya. Kingdom Animalia.
Phylum.
Phylum.
Fish.
No.
No, that's class.
Not a phylum.
Chordate.
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 These are the vertebrates.
Chordate.
Class.
Fish.
There's several, but we are in the class that includes fish. So that's where we are. We've been talking about a bunch of the different adaptations.
Said you had a story about swimwear.
So just, we are talking about adaptations fish have to survival, to reproduction, and so forth. So we talked about most of it. We left off yesterday in talking about gills. Gills, which are the organs adapted to taking oxygen out of the water, releasing carbon dioxide into the water so that the fish can get the gases it needs and get rid of waste gas. So another organ that fish have is something called the swim bladder. And the swim bladder is an organ that's found sort of in the middle of the fish, internal, and its job is to maintain the buoyancy of the fish. So fish obviously live in the water, and their buoyancy or flotation is one factor that determines how they move in the water. So, if a fish has to rise to the surface or swim towards the bottom, it doesn't necessarily need to point itself up and paddle its fins and swim upward. Fish also have this organ that helps them in that, and it's called the swim bladder. Basically, it's like a little membrane that's inside of their body that they can inflate with gas and deflate. So obviously, what happens when they inflate it with gas? They rise up to the surface. And as they remove the gas from that swim bladder, they sink lower in the water. It's like if you had a beach ball and you're holding it under, if you have a fully inflated beach ball, you're trying to hold it under water, right? You let go, it pops up, smacks you in the face. If you deflated half of it, it'd be much easier to hold under the water. And that same sort of thing is how the swim bladder works. Same thing as you're floating in a pool. If you take a really deep breath and just lay on your back, you'll float. If you then exhale all of that air, you'll start to sink. Basically, you're sort of using your lungs the same way a fish uses its swim bladder. So it's inside of them. Colin, be quiet. So the swim bladder can increase and decrease in size. A fish can force gas into it. Some fish inflate it at the surface. Other fish can force gas from their body into it. So it sort of depends on the organism. And it helps to maintain their buoyancy. Now, one thing that we saw, I told you the other day about when I was on that fishing boat in Lake Champlain, and when I was in college, and when we hauled, I told you about the lamprey, we saw the lamprey, but also when we hauled some of the fish on board, what we saw was that there were a bunch of small fish in there that were dead, first of all, and second of all, their mouths were like stuck open, and they had like this thing coming out of their mouth. What happened was, we put our nets into the water, and we brought them back to the surface. And so, deep down in the water, if you ever swam to the bottom of like a 10-foot deep pool, how do your ears feel?
Ow.
Hurts. Why?
Pressure.
Yeah, all of the pressure, all basically of the weight of that water is what pressure is pushing in on your eardrums and it hurts. Well, imagine if you were 100 feet underwater. Okay? There's immense water pressure there. And so when fish are down at a deep depth of a lake, for example, that pressure is keeping their swim bladder relatively small, condensing that gas. If you bring them to the surface, so if they just rise to the surface, if they swim to the surface, they do that gradually, and as the pressure decreases, their swim bladder increases in size. But if they're doing it on their own, they can just like slowly release that gas, and it'll be fine. But if you force the fish from deep in the water all the way to the surface too quickly, the swim bladder expands faster than they can let the gas out, and it basically crushes their internal organs and pokes out of their mouth. And so what we saw, these fish with their mouths like wide open, this bubble coming out, that was their swim bladder, and just expanded and crushed their inside. Sean?
What was the order of my definition?
We'll do that. We're not going to go back and go through our whole notes. So that's what the swim bladder is. Later on, if I get a chance, I'll show you a picture of what that looks like. Now, one thing we're going to talk about with all of our different classes of vertebrates is their circulatory system. Because circulatory systems have evolved over time. And so, as we talked about yesterday, fish were the first vertebrates that evolved. And they have sort of the most basic type of circulatory system. Fish have a two-chambered heart. A two-chambered heart has an atrium, where blood comes into the heart, and a ventricle, which then pumps the blood out. And that's it. As we move on and talk about the other groups, we're going to see some types of animals have three-chambered heart. Some have four-chambered heart. And we'll talk about the advantages of that eventually. But fish have just a two-chambered heart. That's a fish with a swim bladder sticking out of its mouth.
Oh my god.
So, you know, that's because that came to the surface too quickly. Oh, this is another interesting thing. So this is a person that is electrofishing. So when I was in graduate school, I don't know if I did it undergraduate, but when I went to graduate school, one of the things that we did is, oh yeah, I did do this in undergrad too, is electrofishing. So electrofishing is when you have a portable generator on your back that's filled with gasoline, you start it, and it generates an electrical current. And as you walk through the water, you're holding these electrodes in the water. And when you press on the buttons, that lets the current go from one electrode to the other. And any fish that are in the nearby area get shocked, and they become unconscious and rise to the surface. And then your partner that's walking along with you can scoop them up, net them, put them in a bucket, and then you could study them, mark them, do whatever you need to do with the fish. So it's a way of gathering fish for research purposes. You can't just do this like to go fishing and get some electrofishing gear and just walk around and do this. It's generally just for like educational research uses. It's pretty interesting. You gotta be careful. You have to obviously wear rubber waders, because you don't want to be standing in the water when electricity is flowing through it. Sometimes your partner might stumble on a rock and you have to quickly let go of the electrodes so you don't electrocute your partner. Every once in a while, somebody might be in the nearby behind this person and reach into the water for some reason with their hand and get a little shock. It's not enough to really hurt you, but you could feel it. And you could adjust the voltage on the electrofishing generator. So if you increase the voltage, you can catch bigger fish. If you decrease it, you won't stun the bigger fish. You only get the smaller fish. But you kind of have to be careful, because if you put the current too high, you can kill the fish as well. They don't just become unconscious, you can actually kill them. So that's electrofishing. Oh, it is illegal, but people do electrofish. They have these huge electrofishing gear that they put on boats, and basically can just gather hundreds and hundreds of fish at one time. So I guess I'll show you these two videos here. They can get it through their gills as well.
Gills?
Yeah, so do they have gills?
I mean, you tell me.
I am going to tell you. When do they have gills?
Oh, yeah, baby.
So when we have amphibians that metamorphose as tadpoles, they breathe using gills. But as they metamorph into adults, those gills slowly disappear, and what does form? Lungs that are adapted to getting oxygen on land.
Are there any amphibians like you know we have fish that can stay on land?
Yeah, there's aquatic frogs. Like you ever see an African clawed frog, or people keep them in aquariums.
I can't say I have.
They're common aquarium pets, and they live in the water their whole life. They're in water. And this is the last slide. So this shows us the stages of metamorphosis in a frog. So what is this first stage here?
Egg.
Yeah, we have egg. Then in frogs we call the larval stage a tadpole. They start with gills. And then as the tadpole grows and develops, it sort of gradually changes into a frog. It's not like a butterfly where it's a caterpillar, all of a sudden then it's in the pupa stage, then emerges a butterfly. It does all of these steps sort of gradually. So legs start to develop, hind legs, and then front legs start to develop, the tail gets smaller, the gills begin to disappear, lungs start to form until the full transformation into the adult frog. And then the adult frog is mature and can then start reproduction.
What's the previous one? Frog foot?
Actually, I have one more slide. I thought we were done with amphibians. Last thing.
Oh, wow.
So where are all the amphibians now? Are they dead?
What do you mean?
I haven't seen a frog in months.
Hibernating.
They are hibernating. Hibernation is when animals that sometimes live in very cold climates go through a seasonal change in which they basically slow down all of their body functions to the very minimum and generally go in some place that's sort of sheltered and wait out the winter. Why would they hibernate here? And so what else? Bachelor? Is your hand up? Why else do they need to hibernate? There's no food, right? They eat small little invertebrates and things. There's no food for them. So they hibernate because hibernation requires very little energy during the winter. But it does require energy throughout the rest of the year. So as amphibians that hibernate are living out their lives in the spring, summer, and fall around here, they're consuming as much energy as possible, and they are storing up excess energy in these orange structures that are called fat bodies. These fat bodies, this is a frog that ate pretty well before it died, and it stored up lots of energy. That's why those fat bodies are so big. If it were hibernating, it would be slowly using up that energy throughout the winter to keep it alive. Lots of times they bury themselves in the ground, in the mud. And they live off of that stored up energy and fat. Finally, we already said this, they have external fertilization. Typically, they reproduce in the springtime. Why do most animals in our area reproduce in the spring? How is that a helpful adaptation? Oh? Yeah, so when the young are born, they have food in the spring and summer and fall. They have time to grow and develop before the next harsh winter comes. So most animals around here reproduce in the spring in order to make sure their young are going to have enough energy to make it through the winter. So yeah, we said fish lay thousands of eggs, or maybe hundreds of thousands even. Amphibians release less eggs usually, so probably in the hundreds, and often they're in that jelly-like coating.
I like how Sam straight up died when his kids and not have like this one. She's like, no, I'm a